I was born during the Nazi times in Germany, and I was arrested when I was 4 years old on Kristallnacht, which was a terrorist event. I was put in a concentration camp and deported to Poland. I was smuggled by a Christian woman to Holland. She used her daughter's papers to take me across. She pretended I was her daughter. When I was born, I was marked for murder already on my birth certificate. I have fought all my life against that kind of horrible event.
It seems as though we are living in a time of absolute madness. Terrorism is everywhere we look, even though we refuse to see it. We detach ourselves, running on automatic pilot in our daily lives. All too often, when terror strikes, we pay attention only long enough to know whether it happened next door or on the other side of the world. As soon as we have established that our friends and family are safe, we breathe a sigh of relief and go on with our lives. Have we turned to stone? Before we can ever hope to stop the carnage in our midst, we must wake up to it and react to it from our hearts. Can we demand that God stop the tragedy when most of us pretend that it is not a real threat, that it is someone else's problem? When we behave like robots when terrorists strike? Our salvation from this horrific tragedy can come only when we wake up to the reality of the war being waged against all of us, and then tune into our emotion, cry about it, scream about it, and face the danger with determination. If you don't cry for them, who will?
I think the initial reason was 9/11. I was very upset, very, very upset about 9/11 and about terrorism in general. And I felt that it could happen here. And I wanted people to have a visual image of what terrorism is really like. And that's why I felt it was important to bring the bus. When I realized that 11 people died on that bus and about 50 people were injured and an innumerable number of people who were relatives of the dead and the injured were hurt very badly, I felt that it just moved me to the point where I felt people had to see this image. And I wanted people to be able to identify this. It looks no different from an AC transit bus. And if they use their imagination just a little bit, they could see that they could be on such a bus and it could just blow up. With their children who are going to school, with their friends who are, maybe they were going to meet in a coffee shop or go shopping with or going to work. It's not abstract, it's real.
Palestinian bomb We love to die whether it takes trucks, suicide bombers. One day we will have tanks. One day we will have M16s, and we'll get it every day. Remember, we're good. You're nothing but terrorists.
During the course of the presentations at Berkeley, we were surprised to see a large number of counter demonstrators standing across the street and waving really hateful signs, condemning us, and yelling really hateful words at us. We were demonstrating against terrorism. They were demonstrating against us. Well, what that means is they were demonstrating for terrorism.
15 minutes after the bus blew up, I rushed to the scene, and I came over here to see, and I saw the bus smoldering. Then found out from my Palestinian stringers what they were saying in the Palestinian radio, which was the official voice of Palestine immediately got on the air and said this was a great moment in which 11 Israeli criminals had been executed in an act of freedom. The celebration of murders as they take place is the story of how the PLO celebrates the murder of Jews. One of my colleagues and friends was on this bus, Dr. Yecheskel Goldberg, a young psychologist who worked with wayward youth in Jerusalem. And I'll be reading from the podium today what he said about how we should react to terrorist attacks and not just dehumanize them. They're not just numbers, they're people. Dr. Goldberg was blown apart, and he was sitting next to the suicide bomber.
I would just remind you that the 11 people that were killed in bus 19 on the 29th of January in 2004 are really symbolic of the thousands that have been killed by terrorism all across the planet, whether it's in a school in Russia or a train in Spain, whether it's a plane flying into the Pentagon or the Twin Towers, or a suicide bomber in a bus in Israel. This is a global threat that we face today. But we want to come together and say that this is unacceptable, that there is no justified reason for this. There cannot be. This cannot be justified. This kind of barbarity, this kind of cruelty, this kind of godless brutality to people.
With the rise of anti-Semitism, the Schindler's family and our organization Schindler's Ark must not be silent. We have entered into a new era of confrontation, and we must bring a message of peace and the saving of lives for all men. The Nazis used fear and intimidation to make good people afraid to speak out. In the words of Oskar Schindler, he said, "The persecution of the Jews under the general government of Poland meant that we could see horror emerging in many ways. The Jews were being destroyed. I had to help them. There was no choice. And we have no choice in this hour but to help the innocent victims of terror and to at least be a voice in our homes, our communities, and around the world for peace and justice." Bus 19 is a red light warning to the world. Red with the fire of a murderous explosion, and red with the blood of innocent civilians. We are taking a stand against violence before it's too late.
Dr. Martin Luther King, I know there was a question here as whether or not he would have supported an event like this. And we have a brochure here that actually has a speech done by Dr. Martin Luther King that was anti-Zionism equals anti-Semitism. Sonny and I remember the powerful meaning of a bombed out bus for those of us who lived through the Civil Rights Movement. And we remember the Freedom Rider buses that were bombed by the Ku Klux Klan. History is repeating itself. If we forget, we are doomed to continue to repeat this tragedy. Rather, let us understand and grasp the words Dr. Martin Luther King stated when he said, "Violence is immoral because it thrives on hatred rather than love."
People have asked me why I am here today. After all, it is easier to stay home and avoid having to face the horror of this mangled bus
and what it means. How can one stay silent in the face of such senseless acts that have occurred in some 23 countries, including our very own? This afternoon is about people, ordinary people, people of all ages, nationalities, and beliefs. This afternoon is about ordinary people going about the simple, everyday tasks of their lives. Think about the people that you see when you ride the bus, eat in a cafe, walk down a street, go to a movie, shop, or go to work. This afternoon is about the people who died on this bus, but it's not just about those people. It's about the thousands of babies, children, mothers, fathers, uncles, aunts, grandparents, and friends who have died or been wounded. It's about them and their families who bear their loss and live with their hurt. Victims from all over the world whose lives across this globe who've been affected by the unbearable, ugly hand of terrorism and violence. It's about humanity. So it's also about us, here and now. I ask each of you to reach out to your neighbors, bow your heads, and make a commitment of the heart to all who have died or been wounded by the hand of terrorism, so that they will not be forgotten and their suffering will not have been meaningless.
We are here today, Christians, Hindus, Muslims, Jews, and others, to reassert the most basic human right of all, the right to live. To dance at a disco in Bali, to take a vacation in Nairobi, to caucus in New Delhi's parliament, to vote in Baghdad, to shop in Riyadh, to work in New York, to pray in Istanbul, to go to school in Yerushalayim. We are here today to act and join those against this insidious culture of death. And we need your involvement to see to it that the international community, under law, the law that guided the great late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., to finally designate every suicide bomb a crime against humanity. You say, what can law do in face of such inhumanity? No suicide bombing happens on its own. There is a culture of death. There are those who sponsor, there are those who train, and worse, there are those invoking God's name around the planet to bring about such suicide bombers. They need to be brought before the bar of justice. We need to work together, as your fantastic former mayor just said. We need to work together against the terror and against the violence, and must surely draw a red line to see to it that this kind of behavior is ended, and that the tens of thousands of families, maybe more, whose lives have been destroyed, innocent people, will at least know that their loved ones did not die in vain.
Today I stand before you as a victim of terror. Not just once, but twice. The first time in 1967, mobs surrounded my home in my native Libya, and after pouring gasoline all around the perimeter of my house, attempted to burn my home with my family inside, all because we were Jewish. The second time that I was a victim of terror is when, after the Libyan government took everything away from us, confiscated all of our properties, and allowed finally expelled us from the country with just the clothes on our backs and $20. We boarded a bus like that one, who was supposed to take us to the airport. But the driver and conductor discharged all the gasoline from the bus and attempted to burn us in the bus. I'm here to honor the memory of my brothers and sisters who were not as lucky as I was and whose life has been taken forever. I believe that hate is a weapon of mass destruction. We must all stand against those who preach hatred and revenge, against those who allow the climate of hatred to dominate their schools, their madrasas, and their mosques. I'd like to quote Elie Wiesel, who once said, "He who kills in God's name makes his God a murderer."
I know terrorism firsthand, since I was born and raised in the culture that produced it. Oh God, do we need a Martin Luther King in the other Arab world? The epidemic of Islamic terrorism will not end until change comes from within the Muslim community. We Arab Americans have the duty and the opportunity to freely speak, to inspire reformation in the old country. Terrorism doesn't come out of nowhere. It's the end result of years of indoctrination into hate, violence, and discrimination against whole groups of people. It's not just a crime against humanity, but also a crime committed against Arab children and their future. The long-term effect of terror is demoralizing and demeaning to the human spirit. It could be devastating to Western democracies and freedoms. Arabs should realize that terrorism comes at a very high price to their culture. It is destroying the moral fabric, the goodness in Arab society, where suicide bombers are hailed as heroes and children are learning the value of blowing themselves up and killing Jews. The radical force currently in control of the Middle East is in a head-on collision with the rest of the world. That's why I'm speaking out. An American born and raised in Cairo, Egypt, and the Gaza Strip. In Gaza elementary schools, we learned the value of hate, vengeance, and retaliation. Peace was never taught to us as an option and never ever mentioned as a virtue. The glory of battle was the ultimate honor. They scared us from Jews and taught us to solve disputes through violence. That was the only honorable thing to do, they said. After several generations brought up under this severe indoctrination of hate, Arab children are being abused now and being brainwashed to become suicide bombers. This unprecedented and extreme form of jihad is against Islam. It's against decency. It's against everything that's moral. And it's getting worse by the day. The humanity of these Muslim terrorists that are perfectly good people are being brainwashed. Their humanity is being sucked out of them by Muslim preachers and Arab media who praise no mercy to the victims of these busts, to the children, to the innocent civilians, beheading decent people like Daniel Pearl and all the rest. Where is Muslim outrage over terrorism? Quran while beheading non-Muslims, over decades of hijacking, over destroying the Buddha statues in Afghanistan. Where is Muslim outrage against the Beslan school massacre in Russia? Terrorists who hold the Quran while beheading the innocent is an insult to Islam. And Muslim silence, Muslim and Arab silence. After that, it's also an insult to Islam. Muslims around the world should be up in arms against terrorists who gave Islam a bad name. It is the duty of good Muslims to bring out and uplift the compassion, forgiveness, and tolerance in Islam, not only verbally, but by actions. We need to extend compassion, forgiveness, and the famous Arab generosity to our neighbor, our good neighbor Israel. Muslim Americans should head the way. We have freedom to speak here. We're not like the ones oppressed in the Arab world. I am free to speak and stand up and say enough is enough to my culture of origin. We need a movement of reformation in the Muslim world. Teaching Islam in the spirit of tolerance is the only solution for peace. Give Israel the same space. Give Israel some space. Give Israel, the Jews, some space in the big Middle East. Give them some respect and welcome them in the Middle East. Thank you.
We are here today because Shaare Zedek, a 103-year-old, 500-bed, world-class, state-of-the-art hospital, is the only medical center located in the center of Jerusalem which provides medical care to all patients, regardless of religious affiliation or cultural background. As the Director General of Shaare Zedek, Dr. Yonatan Halevi, likes to repeat whenever anybody will listen, politics stop at the doorsteps of Shaare Zedek. We are here today because Shaare Zedek does not discriminate against anybody, including the hundreds of Palestinian children, like the one pictured here, who need pediatric dialysis, a field of specialization at Shaare Zedek. We are here today because Shaare Zedek is often referred to as a model of coexistence, a place where Arabs, Jews, and Christians work side by side every day, sometimes under the most horrific of circumstances, saving the lives of Arabs, Jews, and Christians. We are here today not because we want to be, but because we must mourn the loss of all victims of terror in Israel and all over the world. And because Shaare Zedek will continue to treat victims of terror as human beings, no matter who they are. We are here today because after Dr. David Applebaum, pictured with his daughter Nava, dedicated his life to saving the lives of all victims of terror, he and his beautiful daughter suffered the ultimate price when they were both killed by a suicide bomber. The very next day, on what was to have been Nava's wedding day, instead of getting married, Dr. Applebaum and Nava were buried. Dr. Applebaum was the director of Shaare Zedek's Department of Emergency Medicine. The loss of Dr. Applebaum, who was also an American-born rabbi, and the loss of Nava has left an irreplaceable void in the lives of the thousands of individuals who they both touched. We are here today because, unfortunately, we at Sharet Zedek have a direct connection to bus number 19 over there. 24 of the 50 victims injured from the bombing of that bus were treated at Sharet Zedek.
This bus is a grim reminder that we have to fight terrorism all the way. This is a letter to a child. You remember there was a picture of a toddler dressed as a soldier. This is a letter to all the children like that. Letter to a child. In the Middle East, Russia, Pakistan, India, Indonesia, and everywhere, children live and are used and abused for destruction. Oh baby, I saw your photo. You were dressed as a soldier with guns and a bomb tied to your waist. I cried for a long time. Oh child, I saw your photos, throwing stones at soldiers, cursing and yelling in the streets of your city. I was shocked. I saw your big brother dying on the roadside. He had just blown a bus full of kids and moms like yours. I was stunned. I read about your father crossing the border and blasting a temple. He killed those praying for peace. I was speechless. No more terror, no more killings. You yearn to grow in peace, in plenty. You want to live and let live. Thank you.
Bus. There are a lot of things that go through my mind anyway. I try and imagine the horror of someone who got up in the morning to go to work or go to school and never came home because of that. I think of my children. If my children were going to school to learn, to become decent, honorable people, and that's the end they meet, there's something awfully tragic about that. But there's something else that this bus represents to me, and I don't know if it'll represent it to you, but it represents it to me. It represents cowardice. Because to the very core of the terrorists and their mouthpieces across the street, cowardice is in their heart. There is no safety without some degree of bravery. You are not going to be safe and secure unless you have the courage to stand up to those who would do harm to you and harm to your children and say, we will not tolerate it.
Amzei menucha nechona al kanfei hashchina b'ma'alot kedoshim u'tehorim kezohar hakiyah ma'asirim et nishmot acheinu b'nei Yisrael shenehergu al yedei haterroristim yimach shemam yachad im kol nifgarei terror ba'olam Bikan Eden Tehei Menuchatam Lachein Bal Harachamim Yastirein Beseiter Knafav Liolamim V'yitzror B'tzor HaChayim Et Nishmotehem Adonai Hu Nachlatam V'yanuach B'Shalom Al Mishkavam V'nomar